Is Venezuela now America's turf? How Russia and China are responding. When the United States speaks openly about influence in its own hemisphere, how do other global powers respond? That question is now front and center after dramatic developments involving Venezuela and a growing international debate at the United Nations. As Washington moves quickly to assert control over events in the region, reactions from Russia and China are drawing just as much attention as the operation itself. Some critics say this moment signals a return to old-style power politics. Others argue it reflects a clear-eyed strategy in a more competitive world. Tonight, we examine what Venezuela represents beyond its borders, how Moscow and Beijing are responding behind the scenes, and whether this moment marks a broader shift in how the United States defines its role across the Western Hemisphere. The first appearance of Venezuela's former leader in a U.S. federal courtroom was more than a legal milestone. It was a political signal heard far beyond Washington and Caracas. Standing before a judge in Manhattan, the former president rejected the charges against him and insisted he remained the legitimate leader of his country. U.S. prosecutors outlined a case centered on drug-related and weapons allegations, while emphasizing that the legal process would now move forward under American jurisdiction. But the courtroom was only one stage in a much larger story. Almost simultaneously, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session to address the circumstances surrounding the capture. There, the United States faced sharp criticism from several countries, many of whom argued that the operation violated international norms. Russia's ambassador was among the most vocal. In unusually blunt language, Moscow accused Washington of returning to an era defined by force and unilateral action. The remarks framed the incident not as an isolated event, but as part of a broader pattern of American dominance exercised without global consent. China, while more restrained in tone, also expressed concern through diplomatic channels, emphasizing respect for sovereignty and international law. Yet behind the public criticism lies a more complex reality. According to foreign policy analysts, neither Russia nor China appears eager to escalate the situation directly. Instead, both countries seem to be recalculating how much Venezuela truly matters to their long-term interests. For years, Venezuela has been a strategic partner for both Moscow and Beijing, particularly in the energy sector. Loans, infrastructure projects, and oil agreements tied the country closely to both powers. But experts suggest that what Russia and China value most is not political allegiance, but access. Access to energy, access to markets, access to influence. From that perspective, the question becomes less about who governs Venezuela and more about who controls the flow of resources. Some analysts argue that as long as oil continues to reach global markets, Russia and China may be willing to adapt. Whether that energy is purchased directly from Caracas or indirectly through U.S.-controlled channels may matter less than maintaining stable supply. This helps explain the measured response from both capitals. At the same time, Washington has made its intentions increasingly clear. Senior officials and public statements from the Trump administration suggest a renewed focus on spheres of influence, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. In recent social media posts and speeches, U.S. officials have referred to the region as America's strategic backyard, language that echoes Cold War-era thinking. Supporters of this approach argue that it reflects reality. They say the United States has always prioritized stability close to home, and that allowing rival powers to gain influence in the Americas poses unacceptable security risks. From this view, recent actions are not radical, but overdue. Critics, however, see the risks. They argue that openly embracing power-based diplomacy undermines the international system the United States helped build. By acting first and explaining later, Washington may weaken trust among allies and embolden rivals elsewhere. This debate is not limited to foreign capitals. Within the United States, lawmakers and analysts are divided over what this strategy means politically. Some warn that aggressive moves abroad could clash with long-standing promises to limit overseas involvement. Others counter that the administration has carefully avoided large-scale commitments, framing its actions as short, decisive operations rather than open-ended engagements. So far, political fallout has been limited. Republican leaders in Congress have largely avoided public criticism. while opposition voices have focused on legal and diplomatic concerns rather than immediate political consequences. For President Trump, the moment may even reinforce his image as a leader willing to act decisively. That image matters as the country approaches another election cycle. By projecting strength abroad, the administration may be seeking to shift public attention away from domestic challenges and toward questions of national power and global standing. Whether that strategy succeeds remains to be seen. Meanwhile, Latin America is watching closely. In Venezuela, a new interim leadership has taken office, signaling cautious openness toward Washington while facing immense economic and political pressure at home. The path forward depends largely on decisions made in the White House. In neighboring Colombia, security forces have increased readiness amid concerns about spillover effects. President Gustavo Petro has urged regional unity, warning that individual countries could be vulnerable if left to confront great power politics alone. These reactions highlight a broader regional anxiety. For decades, Latin American nations have balanced relationships between the United States and emerging global powers. The events in Venezuela suggest that balancing act may be becoming more difficult, and the implications extend beyond the region. If Russia and China accept a reduced role in Venezuela, they may look elsewhere to expand their influence. Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia could see increased engagement as Moscow and Beijing seek to offset losses closer to U.S. borders. In that sense, Venezuela may represent not an endpoint, but a pivot. A moment where lines are being redrawn, not just geographically, but strategically, where the rules of engagement between major powers are being tested in real time. For Washington, the challenge now is managing the aftermath. Asserting influence may bring short-term control, but sustaining leadership requires cooperation, credibility, and predictability. How the United States balances those factors in the coming months will shape not only its relationship with Latin America, but its standing on the global stage. Venezuela has become a symbol far larger than itself. It now represents a question about power, influence, and how openly those forces are exercised in today's world. As Russia and China voice criticism but stop short of confrontation, the message is complex. Resistance exists, but so does realism. For the United States, this moment offers both opportunity and risk. Opportunity to reaffirm leadership in its own region, risk of accelerating global divisions elsewhere. Whether this marks the return of firm American dominance or the beginning of a more fragmented world order remains unclear. What is certain is that the world is paying close attention. Thank you for watching. Stay with us as this story continues to unfold.